Welcome to the Johns Hopkins Women's Health Podcast, A Woman's Journey, Insights That Matter. I'm Kelly Gear-Ripken, and I invite you to listen to Johns Hopkins specialists discuss the latest topics in women's health. Now here's your host, Lily Shockney.
Hello, this is Lily Shockney. We are living in an extraordinary time right now. A Woman's Journey, Insights That Matter, is devoting this time to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are pleased to offer audio transcripts of a series of webcasts where Johns Hopkins experts offer a number of pertinent topics. What follows is an audio of the first of 6 webcasts featuring Johns Hopkins Medicine psychiatrist Dr. Karen Swartz, who talks about coping with stress and social isolation during the pandemic. Keep up to date with the latest women's health information by visiting A Woman's Journey website, hopkinsmedicine.org/A Woman's Journey, or by following A Woman's Journey on Facebook and Twitter. I also want to make you aware of 2 Johns Hopkins Medicine websites dedicated to providing you trusted, up-to-date information from Hopkins experts. The first is hopkinsmedicine.org/coronavirus. And the second is from Johns Hopkins University and Medicine, coronavirus.jhu.edu.
Good evening. I want to welcome all of you to this discussion about managing stress and some of the new challenges we're all facing with social distancing in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. A couple things I want to stress. As a psychiatrist, I feel like I have something to contribute to this discussion about stress and anxiety and minimizing our isolation. But we have fantastic resources here at Johns Hopkins about the actual COVID-19 infection. I want to echo what Leslie Waldman said about going to the Johns Hopkins website to get that information as well. So managing stress. I'm not going to say anything tonight that's amazing or that you in many ways didn't think of before, but we all need to hear things multiple times and in different ways to have them actually stick. And we have to hear them even more times to get us to actually change our behavior. So right now, we are all dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety because it's a period of really a lot of uncertainty. And when we have to change our routines, anxiety tends to go up. So I would say 100% of people right now are dealing with anxiety, changes in routines, and dealing with things being very unpredictable. This is a time that we need to take things one day at a time. We need to focus on the moment and what needs to be done today. We're not yet at a point where we even can accurately predict what's going to happen with the COVID-19 virus. And so we're in danger of becoming very distressed and overwhelmed if we try too hard to figure that out. This is a time to have focus on short-term goals and activities. It's also a time to avoid making big decisions or fast decisions. So let me start by making some general comments about stress and resilience. So how does our body respond to any period of stress? Well, we release cortisol, and there's also release of adrenaline. That gets triggered by stress hormones, and then the adrenal glands that sit right on top of the kidneys pump out adrenaline. So what happens when we go into that state? Well, it's fight or flight. The body naturally has 2 states. One is the sympathetic response, fight or flight, where your heart's pounding and you have all this energy in your arms and legs in case you have to either get in a fight or run away. And I want to contrast that with the parasympathetic response, which I think of as rest and digest. When you want to think about what that is, think about 2 hours after Thanksgiving dinner when you don't have the energy to stand or walk. You can just sit there and rest and digest. So right now, many of us are feeling in fight or flight more than is healthy for us. Cortisol and inflammatory cytokines are the key mediators of our body's stress response. And this stress response can hit all sorts of systems in our body with negative impact on a number of conditions. This would include diabetes, dementia, cardiac disease, our immune responses, as well as depression and anxiety. Let's talk a little bit about the immune response to stress, because I think we're all thinking a lot about our immune system right now with this virus. Cortisol, which is produced by the body in response to stress, can inhibit the immune response. Some studies have showed that our B cells and T cells, some of the white blood cells that fight infection, don't do as well or have as good a functioning if you're under stress. But the good news is there are also studies that shows there's a positive response in the immune system to stress reduction. One study, for example, compared two groups of people. One had mindfulness meditation training, so a very proven stress reduction technique, and another group did not. These two groups were then each given their flu vaccine, and they found in the group that had done mindfulness that they had a faster response in building antibodies compared to the group that did not. Even more reason to think about reducing stress during this time. So what else do we do when we're stressed? There was a large national survey where they asked people about their response to stress, and this will surprise no one. About 40% of people said that they did the following things: overeat, skip meals, not be able to sleep, feel irritable, feel fatigued, lack energy, and have no motivation. Now that's on top of also feeling stressed. And so it's a very negative feeling that people have and a pretty out of control one. I'm going to say this a couple times tonight. We all need to protect our sleep. If you are exhausted and running on fumes, the likelihood that you have a stressful reaction to a small thing goes up. But it's also the case that you just will feel overwhelmed much more easily. Let me take a moment now just to talk about some basics of sleep hygiene or trying to get a better night's sleep. Try to go to bed at the same time and get up at the same time each day. Avoid caffeine late in the day. Avoid screens, so things that are putting bright light into your eyes late at night. Have a routine for getting ready for bed. Try to have a comfortable bed and pillow and a good temperature for your room. And get regular exercise during the day, but not at night, so that you're feeling jazzed up or energized right before going to bed. And I know many of you will ignore this advice, but it is the advice of sleep experts not to have pets in your bedroom. So those are some things about sleep, and I'm going to mention that so many times because it's one of the core things we can all be doing. Let's talk now a little bit about resilience. Resilience, people hear that word and they wonder, what is it? Do I have it? Do I not have it? If I don't have it, can I get it? Well, what it is our ability to maintain or regain mental health after we go through a period of adversity. When you think about it, resilience is really our ability to bounce back or an ability to bend but not break when you're under a lot of stress. Resilience and having it has been shown to be a real predictor of well-being. And so I think, again, it's one of the things that we all want to develop if we can. Now, it's not something magic. It's not like some people have it and some people don't. It is a skill set. So in many ways, it's like a muscle. You have to exercise it to be able to develop it. I'm going to talk about some skills that you can build and techniques you can use, but you have to practice them. And sometimes we're too perfectionistic. People say, well, I'm not good at that, so I'm just not going to try. Everything gets better with practice. Why do we care? Well, if you're less resilient, you're more likely to get focused on negative problems. You're much more likely to feel overwhelmed, to use the unhealthy coping techniques I talked about, like overeating and drinking, things like that. And you're also much more likely to develop serious depression and anxiety. So let's talk about what is involved in resilience training. Most resilience training uses the techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy. The basic idea between cognitive behavioral therapy and CBT, same thing, is that you're going to try to change your cognition, the C, and your behavior, the B, so that your feelings, your thoughts will then change. So cognitive behavioral therapy is changing thoughts, and behaviors will eventually improve your feelings. One of the big things we ask people to do is identify distorted thoughts they're having, irrational thoughts, very negative thoughts, catastrophic thinking of this is a disaster, I'm never going to get through it. What we ask people to do is to challenge those negative thoughts. Force your mind away from the negative thoughts, almost like you're changing the channel. We're never going to get through this. No, I can get through it. I know what I need to do today. I don't think that we have enough health care. Well, we're going to figure it out because smart people are working on that. That kind of way that you change from something negative to something more positive. I also think it's quite helpful to think a little bit about positive thoughts that mean something to you when you're feeling okay. So if you get really stuck in a loop, you can say, all right, I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to think about that great vacation we had last month. I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to think about how fun it was to be at my son's 4th birthday party. That you bring up and you have in your mind a repertoire of things you can turn to when you're trying to get more positive thoughts. The other thing that goes along with cognitive behavioral therapy, of course, is behavior change. In many ways, this is even more challenging than changing your thoughts. It is important to change your behaviors. So, for example, if you're sitting and worrying, get up, move around, go make something healthy to eat, do a little exercise. Exercise, which I'll mention again a couple times, is really important because it does help to reduce some of the negative energy we have and allows that to dissipate a bit. CBT has been very well studied in the treatment of depression and anxiety, and so we know that it's also helpful when people are dealing with general stress. Another kind of exercise I'd like to talk about is from positive psychology. Now, this was developed by Dr. Seligman, and the thought is we need to train ourselves to be focused on more positive things, better communication, thinking about the positive things going on in your life, and giving yourself confidence that if there's a problem, you'll be able to break it down and solve it. Let me share just a couple of the things that have been studied by Dr. Seligman and his colleagues. They did a study where they asked people to try one of 3 positive psychology exercises. I'll describe them in detail because they're not tricky at all. The first was 3 good things in life. People are asked once a day to reflect and write down 3 good things going on in their life. The second was using a strength in a new way. Some people were asked to think, what are you good at? And then think, oh, what's a new way I can do that today? I suspect many of us are using strengths we hadn't realized we had in a new way. And the last is my favorite, gratitude exercises. A gratitude exercise is an opportunity once a day to write down 3 things you're grateful for in your life. I will tell you that's my personal favorite and something I've been trying to do every evening. Just think about things that I'm grateful for. Now, when they studied this, they had about 400 people doing this over the internet. So it wasn't face-to-face. Really, people were doing it on their own. And amazing, they found that if they did that for a week, when they compared them to people that were just writing memories, keeping a journal kind of activity, they had higher happiness scores at 1, 3, and 6 months. So not only are these sensible things, there's actually some science behind it that lets you know that you are able to make changes. You can absolutely develop resilience by training your attention so that you're more intentional. And what I mean by that is you actually think about, where am I putting my attention? Where am I trying to do, what am I trying to think about? When you train your attention to go from the negative to more positive things, it allows you to focus and spend more time thinking about meaningful things in your life and more positive experiences in your life. Now, there's another goal that I think we all could work on right now, and that's learning to regulate our emotions and develop more self-control. We all vary in how strong our emotional responses are. There's not really a lot we can do about that. However, what we do about it is under our control. I think it's really helpful to learn to recognize when you are having, or even better, about to have, a really strong emotional response especially if it's going to be negative. So then you want to use techniques to control your response. These are some pretty basic things. Take some deep breaths. Remove yourself from a situation. End a conversation instead of starting to yell. I remember saying once to someone I was working with, I think we should have this conversation another day, because I knew that I was about to get really angry and then we wouldn't have any kind of a productive conversation. If you're better able to control your emotional responses, you are going to have a better sense of self-control and confidence that you have yourself under control. I would also say this is really important when many families are spending a lot of time together at home. A lot of people in a small space where you're not having breaks from each other. How important can it be if we're actually trying to control our emotions and control our sense of anger and frustration? The other thing is that practice is important. None of us are good at this when we first try. So with more practice, where you're trying to go from negative thoughts to positive thoughts, where you're trying to interrupt your angry responses or frustrated responses, these all get better with time. Sometimes it almost becomes automatic that you've trained yourself that when you start feeling yourself getting angry, that you then say, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to walk away and come back. However, at the beginning, it always takes work. Many people, when they're learning to switch to more positive thoughts, will do things like say, stop it to themselves if they're in a negative loop. And then they will choose to think about something else. You might also choose to do something else. Read something that's distracting, talk about something positive, go work on a project, but get your mind off the negative thoughts that are looping in your mind. I want to take a few minutes to talk about mindfulness meditation. I'd mentioned that earlier. These practices are also a form of resilience training. With mindfulness, there are both formal and informal practices. Formal practices often include things like a seated practice, where you are sitting in a quiet space, you're focusing on your breathing, you're doing a body scan, paying attention to how all elements of your body feel. And these can be incredibly helpful. But sometimes informal practices can also be helpful, especially if you find yourself getting more anxious or being more upset. They could include taking any typical activity and just fully focusing on that. How does it feel to brush your teeth? What does your toothbrush feel like in your hand? What does it feel like to have the toothbrush in your mouth? Washing dishes, just really basic things, but you take a moment and say, for a few minutes, I'm only going to pay attention to what I'm doing right now. Focusing on the sounds and the smells and the sights are all a part of that. So it's making it a very in the moment experience. It's really learning how to use positive distraction in the moment. And that's another way that we can move our mind away from negative thoughts. Now, there are a number of apps that help people go through these activities. I'm affiliated with none of them. These are some that people have told me they have found helpful. One is the Calm app, C-A-L-M. Another is Headspace. That might have the best name, H-E-A-D-S-P-A-C-E, Headspace. And another is Insight Timer. Again, these are all possibilities. I'm sure any search in the App Store for mindfulness apps would be a good option. Find something, though, that you think works for you and that you like the way they're doing it. If you don't enjoy doing something, you won't do it. And without practice and doing this on a repeated basis, it won't be helpful to you. Now, why am I talking about all of this? Our overall goal, every one of us should have a goal of reducing our baseline level of stress and anxiety so we are better able to handle spikes in our anxiety as they come. When something major happens, there's a crisis with your work, there's a crisis with your family. So if overall we're feeling less stressed at baseline, we're going to be in a much better place to handle it. There have also been studies that show that this really works. There was a study of nurses and nursing students long before COVID-19 that showed that mindfulness-based stress reduction practices allowed nurses to report feeling less stressed, less anxious, less depressed, and have less burnout. In addition, they were saying they also had a sense of well-being that was greater and that they felt more empathy, which is, of course, what we want from any healthcare professional. More general resilience training with problem solving and helping people feel a sense of mastery. They did this with high school students, and they found that the high school students were using illicit substances less after the training. Now, I want to take a minute to talk about what resilience training and mindfulness, meditation, and all of these very helpful practices do not do. They do not treat underlying major depression and serious anxiety disorders. This is a time when we have to make sure we're not missing those because we're saying, well, everyone's anxious, everyone's feeling depressed. There's a form of anxiety and depression, and these are medical problems that need very specific treatment. For anxiety, the two big common things that we're going to be dealing with are senses of general anxiety and panic, and then after this crisis, post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm just going to say something about panic attacks because I think that's coming up a lot right now. That is when someone has a very acute onset of anxiety that lasts usually for just several minutes, but with it, there are a lot of physical symptoms. Heart pounding out of your chest, having trouble breathing, and often people even describe being very lightheaded or having tingling around your mouth or in your fingers or toes. I just want to make the point that a lot of those symptoms come from hyperventilating. And so if you can just start doing some deep breathing, that sometimes can even break the cycle of a panic attack. Now with depression, the kind of depression that's a medical problem, we're looking for a combination of low mood or irritable mood or not really feeling anything, along with physical symptoms like not being able to sleep, not being able to concentrate, not being able to focus, changes in appetite, changes in energy, and then importantly, changes in your self-confidence, where you're really down on yourself and much more critical of yourself than usual. And of course, the most serious thing that can happen with depression is that people have thoughts about death or suicide. In the middle of this crisis, we want to make sure that we're not missing people that are having more serious conditions that need a lot more treatment than simply working on relaxation, resilience, and mindfulness. So let me just summarize some of these general points about stress. It's a very universal experience. It can have quite significant impact on physical and emotional health, and it takes work to develop the kind of skills that I think we would all benefit from, like resilience, mindfulness meditation practices, and some of the cognitive behavioral techniques. All of these things, mindfulness, gratitude exercises, the CBT where you take your mind off the most negative thoughts, can reduce stress. But it's also important, as I said, to make sure we're not missing more serious things going on. I also want to make a point that we need to be kind and empathic. One of our disaster psychiatry experts shared with me today that there's a real stigma that people feel when there are infectious disease crises. And I think it's important that we make sure that we are not pulling away from people that might actually get infected. Now, physically, you obviously should not be near them, but that doesn't mean that you can't call and check on them and make sure that they're getting the care that they need. I would like to take a moment before we talk about COVID-19 in particular to quote a famous Pittsburgher. As a Pittsburgh native, I'm very proud to be associated with Mr. Rogers. He said there are 3 ways to ultimate success. The first way is to be kind. The second way is to be kind, and the third way is to be kind. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about in this next section about COVID-19 and social distancing have a theme of taking care of each other and being kind. Okay, now let's talk about some of the things that are particular because we're facing this COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the challenges from this are from being an incredibly unpredictable time where we don't know what's going to happen and we're not even sure what we should plan for. So one of the most important things we can all do in this new normal is to establish a routine and to get structure in our lives. Again, as I said earlier, this is a time to take things one day at a time. We all do best with structure and predictability. So here are some basics. Protect your sleep. I think I've now said that 6 times. This is not a time to stay up late, binge watching shows, and surfing the net. Get up in the morning. Do not work from your bed. Take a shower. Put on regular clothing. Do not stay in your pajamas all day. I do think that video conferencing is helping with this, but it's also just important that you're in a routine and that you're taking care of yourself. Create a schedule that includes a start time, an end of your day, and breaks. There has to be an end of your day. I have a very hardworking sister who said, well, the problem of working from home is that you can just keep working. And I was urging her to set up a close of business, as I think we all need. Protect your own health so that your family and friends do not need to worry about you. So follow the guidelines that the health experts are sharing so that you're confident that you're doing everything you can do to keep yourself and those you care about safe and healthy. When you can't have complete control in a situation, and certainly none of us feels very in control at the moment, I think, it's helpful to have some concrete things to do. Be 6 feet away from each other. Stay home if you're able. Be thoughtful about whether you really need to go to the store today or if it could wait for a few more days so you're going less frequently. And then also with routines, make sure you have an evening routine for getting ready for bed and know that that takes more than 5 minutes. Here are some specific things I think would help with stress reduction for everyone. Breathe. Now I know that's showing up on a bunch of different suggestions about what to do, but I'm talking about doing deep breathing, where you take a deep breath, hold it for 4 seconds, and then let it out. Others involved with yoga might do it for even longer periods, but even doing it 4 seconds in, holding it for 4 seconds, 4 seconds out, will break a cycle if you start hyperventilating or getting more anxious. Another thing we all need to do to reduce stress is limit how much time we're watching the news or looking at our news feed on our phones. It is very important to be informed. I'm not telling anyone to ignore the news, but I think we have to think about how much of our day is spent with very concerning things, especially now when a lot of it is speculative rather than specific things. Go to proven, trusted websites to get your news as opposed to speculative where someone's just trying to have a really dramatic headline to get more clicks. I'm feeling very technically savvy by saying more clicks. Don't watch the news or read your news feed for a couple hours before you go to sleep. Your mind has to have an opportunity to disconnect from what's going on. And also in an effort to protect your sleep, have some positively distracting activities planned, like reading. This is a time that reading a book might be helpful because of not wanting to have a bright screen shining in your eye. Or maybe watching something that you're interested in, talking with a friend about something which is not how everyone's doing in the middle of this crisis. I also want to make sure that you take time to laugh with your friends and your family. My brother is a constant source of outrageous videos on YouTube about baby goats in pajamas and cats. And I used to tease him about sending these, and now they are a very welcome break in the middle of my day. So share things that are funny or that you found funny. Get some exercise every day. Depending on your local guidelines, maybe you can go outside for a walk, but even if you aren't supposed to do that, exercise within your home. Make sure, though, that you are maintaining social distancing. If your spiritual life is important to you, find ways to connect with your community. Many, many religious communities are providing online services. I saw online today that someone was celebrating Mass where their people sent pictures and the priest put them around the church at spots, so he was interacting with faces. And very importantly, make sure that you are following the recommendations for social distancing, which is physical distancing of obviously 6 feet, so that you know that others don't need to worry about you. A final point, which I think we all really need to take seriously, is limiting how much alcohol we're drinking or the use of any other drugs. Alcohol is a chemical depressant, and it can have negative effects on mood and anxiety. And I think as people are home and more isolated, they're going to be at particular risk when drinking alone and perhaps drinking more than they might typically. The last thing I want to talk about are just a few things about social distancing and working from home in a healthier way. Number one thing is remembering that social distancing does not mean limiting social contact. We can all use FaceTime and Zoom and phone calls and planned interactions. I think we can all try to make things that we might do in a more solitary way, more communal. For example, pick a book and get a bunch of your friends to read it too, so that you have something to talk about with each other than what you're doing in the midst of this crisis, something positively distracting. Similarly, choose to watch a movie and discuss it with your friends. As I said, we all need topics of conversation that go beyond COVID-19 and how we're managing it. If you're able to, create a workspace that's physically different than your bed or your couch. My nephew, who's in 8th grade, had a great suggestion. He said, create a space where you work during the day and then have a different space you move to in the evening, even if it's only 5 feet away. So I thought that was remarkably insightful. Now, also make sure that you set a schedule when you are checking in with the people you're worrying about the most, whether those are your older parents or other friends or neighbors or family members, so that you're doing that regularly. And I would suggest doing frequent checks rather than lengthy interactions so that everyone doesn't get wiped out. A few final planning suggestions. Be sure you know who you would call if you felt ill. Is that your own doctor? Is that a local clinic? Or if you're worried about someone else's health or your family's health, make sure you know if you have older parents, who should your dad call or who would you call on your father or mother's behalf? And then also have a sensible number of supplies in your home. This does not mean 6 months worth of toilet paper. One other practical suggestion, write down some of these options that you and your family come up with when you're feeling calm and having a good evening about what you might do to get your mind off of being stressed or anxious or being cranky with each other. Take that list, put it on the refrigerator, write it on a card and put it in your pocket so that in a moment where you're really feeling stressed, you're not trying to both brainstorm and then do one of the activities. I do this with a lot of patients dealing with anxiety with the idea that, well, the first one didn't work. Well, here's a second one and a third one and a fourth one. I think we all want to do something to help. And two of the most important things we can do right now is to follow the recommendations to decrease physical contact with others through social distancing, and to stay at home if we're ill or worried that we might be ill. And in those situations, we want to make sure that we're maximizing our contact in other ways through technology so that we're not alone when we're being responsible. Now, at this point, I'd like to hear your questions and continue our conversation. Now, I will tell you that I'm technologically challenged, but I think I can do this. I'm going to pick out some that I think are that are relevant for everyone. Well, I went into the chat, so I am technologically challenged. Sorry about that. If you have a question, type it into the Q&A box at the bottom. The way it works is that you're all muted because with over 1,000 people on the call, it would be impossible to hear everyone. So here's a question: how to tell the difference between psychosomatic and real symptoms? That can be really difficult. And sometimes it takes someone talking to their doctor, because what we know is that there are certain symptoms that tend to occur together. For example, the typical symptoms of a panic attack and the symptoms of a heart attack are not the same, even though people might have chest discomfort with both. And so if you're really worried, this is not a time to say, oh, I'll just ignore everything. But it's often with a phone call or a quick check-in that you can get that sorted out. I'm not going to be answering questions about the virus because I think we have better experts at Johns Hopkins to do that, just to let you know. So is there a thing as too much sleep? Believe it or not, the answer is yes. Now, most of us are pretty darn sleep deprived, so we might be catching up a little bit. There was once a study where they took people out of their normal homes and they just let them sleep as much as they wanted. And for the first several days, many people slept 10 or 12 or 14 hours to catch up. However, that is generally not what people need. Most people need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours a night. And right now, I think keeping a regular schedule probably makes the most sense. It's okay to get a little extra, but you don't want to be essentially hiding out in your bed. What happens too, people will tell me, well, I spent all day in bed and then I'm really upset with myself because I did nothing, I got nothing done. And so there are a couple reasons not to do that. Now, I'm going to take on this no pets in the bedroom. That is from sleep experts. I think right now comfort trumps everything. So, if you have trouble sleeping because, as one of my friends has, a dog who pokes him in the eye every 10 minutes, that's a problem. But right now, many people are going to get a lot of comfort from their pets, and I'm not for a minute saying that that's not an important thing. So someone had a question about, the news. I think all of us can decide how much we need, but 24/7 is not appropriate. I'm sure that the news channels are all trying to compete with each other, and so you're going to get very dramatic headlines. I would suggest that you get a news source you trust. Maybe that's one of the national nightly newses or one of the national cable services, and then maybe local news. But watch news a couple times a day, and then maybe you allow yourself another time that you check the headlines on the internet. But it's limiting the amount of time you're doing that I think is really important to reduce stress. There are a bunch of questions about whether this will be available. After the webinar, it's being recorded, and so it will be posted on the Johns Hopkins A Women's Journey website. Just to answer that. That was one. There's a question about how we can stay motivated to keep eating healthy. I think it's just an opportunity to make a behavioral change. I'm at the hospital right now at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and I'm here, but we have a wonderful salad place, and I've made myself go there more than I have in the last 6 months. So, I think it's a choice of what we're choosing to do. A couple of people had questions about the 3 points about positive psychology. I'm assuming that means you would like to know the 3 kinds of exercises you can do. One is reflecting each day on 3 good things happening in your life. The second is using a strength in a new way. I think that's trickier to do just on your own. So I would suggest you either keep a diary and write down 3 good things in your life each day, or do a gratitude exercise, which is very straightforward. Each day at a chosen time. I personally choose to do it at night. You think about 3 things you're grateful for. And that way you have an opportunity to really focus on things that matter to you and that are much more positive. A number of people have questions about how to talk with children. I think the single most important thing we can do for children is to tell them that we are going to do everything we can to keep them safe, and they can count on us to take care of them. They cannot be worrying about whether they're going to need to take care of us. This is another thing that relates to the news. If you have news blasting all day at home and your kids are there, they're probably going to be hearing a lot of things they have trouble processing or have trouble understanding. So another question is about people who live alone. I think it's a great time to make a network of other people who live alone. So you're going to do FaceTime. You're going to do the thing I thought about, you are going to watch a movie and then talk about it. You're all going to read the same book. You're going to just make a commitment that you check in on each other, because this is the time that technology, I usually am very frustrated by technology as a psychiatrist, But right now I love it because people can have much more interactive communication than if they were just at home. So thoughts about yoga, I think it's terrific. As someone who is not particularly flexible herself, it's not my choice, but it's a wonderful kind of relaxation and has all the breathing training and other things that make it a particularly good form of exercise. So here's a frequent question. How can you manage being in close quarters with a partner or spouse and limiting arguments? Well, I think you have to talk about it. I think you have to talk about what you're arguing about and why you're arguing. I might give a suggestion that comes out of couples therapy, that you pick a time of day that you're going to talk about things that are frustrating you, and that you put effort the rest of the day, or maybe you only do that once or twice a week, but the rest of the time you put in effort to not arguing. You walk away, you don't raise your voice, etc. Technically, some people, I think technically the concern about TV and screens, the bigger worry is your phone very close to your eyes, or an iPad, Kindle, something like that, very close to your eyes. So, if you're watching a movie on your phone, that's probably more problematic than a television that is across the room. I will say you want to think about what you're watching. So a really scary horror film is probably not the thing right now for late at night rather than earlier in the day. So a question about how do you differentiate anxiety now versus underlying anxiety, PTSD, etc. Well, one thing that is important is to think about the degree to which it is interfering with functioning. For both depression and anxiety, the forms that are medical problems go beyond the feeling edgy or upset or worried, that they really interfere with functioning. And if you're feeling so low or so anxious that you're not able to get things done, it's probably important that you talk with someone about that, whether that's your primary care doctor or one of the many hotlines that is available to talk things through. The question is, if all else fails, are anxiety medications worthwhile? I would actually argue that each person is different. And for some, it shouldn't be that all else fails. It might be that you're having a kind of panic that would be very much helped by medicine. Again, that's a very individual recommendation and discussion, but I hope people will be open to having depression and anxiety treated, especially now. I do think there's a lot of stigma with these illnesses, and so people tend to think that they're doing a better job for themselves if they don't get them treated, but that's simply not true. There's a question about what are we doing about teenagers who are worrying about, their next steps, college, SATs, etc. I think that we just have to say, you know what, this is going to sort itself out. Every college in America pretty much has closed, and I'm sure they're planning. And then in weeks from now, they will have guidance about how we're going to handle all of these things. It's amazing what can be done, whether it's virtual visits or, obviously studying for things like the SAT. I think that we'll have more guidance in the future. But it is true that every young person thinking about colleges and applying to colleges is pretty much in the same situation, as opposed to some being, not affected by this at all, because we're all in this together. So a question about what do you do when your mind is racing and you can't sleep? One thing you do is you don't stay in bed with your mind racing. You can get up, you can go get a glass of water, something to drink. Glass of water is probably best if you've brushed your teeth. So you get a glass of water and you move around a little bit. What you shouldn't do is stay in bed for hours unable to sleep, because then you start associating not being able to sleep with being in your bed. So that's another piece of sleep hygiene. So you get up, perhaps you read for a little bit, sitting in a chair or a different room, and then you try to go back to bed. Some people were saying that they were thinking about getting counseling before. If you were wondering if perhaps that would be helpful, this is probably a terrific time to go forward with that. One thing I will tell you is that the psychiatric community has really shifted to doing telemedicine visits. And so many, many clinics are able to set up new evaluations with people using technology so that you do not actually need to go to a clinic. So you don't have to worry about having an exposure, but rather would be able to get started in treatment. I have started doing that with my own outpatients, and I'm really surprised by how well it works. It's actually, great because you can see someone and you're able to be interactive. So unlike something like this, which is very much a one way, that is not. So questions about homeschooling. I think this is a big challenge, and I have great respect for all the parents out there who now have their kids being homeschooled. I think many school districts are going to try to find out ways to do distance learning. So rather than you're trying to keep them organized, I'm hoping they'll soon have assignments. But I think that's one thing you can do. Give them assignments. It could be that you're all reading a book together. It could be that you are asking them to make comments about something. Online, there are tons of resources where you could be doing math and, other things as well. I think the worry shouldn't be about whether they're behind or not, because we will catch up as a society, but rather just keeping kids busy and not being busy watching, their favorite movie for the 700th time. It is a phenomenon, isn't it? I do think that there's a question about whether the pandemic could lead to PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder when it ends. I think we know from all previous pandemics or disasters that there are certainly going to be a group of people that are vulnerable to that. Right now, we're dealing with acute stress. For some, they'll get through the crisis just fine, but later they'll have a response to having been under this level of stress for a long time. So our support for each other and our opportunity, our support for each other and an opportunity to interact in a different way is going to be very important on an ongoing basis. I'm just trying to find something that's generally of interest for these questions. So as far as kids at home with stress and anxiety, everyone can be doing yoga together or be doing some exercise together, some deep breathing together. I think having some of the activities we do together be fun probably is pretty darn important, as is, having a game night or having recess during their day of working. You might need a little recess from your working at home as well, which could be helpful. I think in general for children, if they're going to take their lead from their parents, that's what I've certainly seen with other crises. And so the more you are able to be calm, cool, and collected and reassure them that it's okay to be nervous, that you want to hear what they're anxious about, but that you're able to say that you're going to work to keep them safe, and that there are a lot of helpers and there are a lot of people that are going to be taking care of everyone. I think that's important. But as I said, they need to not hear the most dramatic questions, the dramatic headlines on the news. Just to clarify this, a bunch of questions about what's the difference about 3 good things in life and 3 things that you're grateful for. They're very similar, but 3 good things in life might be, I feel healthy today, and, I live in Baltimore where we have Johns Hopkins and I can get advice from them, and I'm grateful for all those too. So turn them all into gratitude exercises. I'm trying to make a point and I realized it was silly. So many people have family all over the country. I certainly do too. I think the best way to be connected is to have frequent contact. And so check on each other. But as I said, multiple frequent check-ins are probably more important than really long discussions, because everyone will get fatigued if what you're talking about is, are you doing okay? Do you have supplies? Things like that. There's a question about how do you help elderly neighbors? Well, one thing is you can call them and see if they need things. We're allowing deliveries of all sorts, and you could be the delivery person from the grocery store to them, that they could help you in that way and then figure it out. Most of the nursing home facilities have not allowed visitors for the last week or so, and that's in response to some of the things that have happened in other cities, because that's a very vulnerable population. But that's an important, I think almost every facility that's not allowing visitors is trying to set up some system for televisits. Even if the person there might not have a smartphone, they're often getting tablets or something of that sort. So you can call a central number and then the staff there can work to be able to connect through video to your relative. As far as mental health services, as I said, I think that the ability to do telemedicine and a number of states actually loosening the rules for doing telemedicine is going to make it maybe not quite such a crisis. I do think there are a group of very ill, vulnerable people, and I worry about getting them the care they need, but I worry about that when we're not in the middle of the COVID-19. So someone said that they were older, and what could they do to assure their children that they're okay? I'm going to address that just because I have an older set of parents, and you can let them know how you're feeling. I remember, this is very ironic. My brother lived in China during the SARS epidemic, and I would listen to NPR in the morning and I would freak out, and then I would call him, and that would be the evening in Beijing. And at that point he would say, I feel fine. He knew he felt fine. He wasn't worried because he knew how he felt. So I think a quick check-in where you're able to say, I know I don't have a fever, I'm not coughing, I feel okay, will be reassuring to your children and family members if you're older and people are really worried about you. When you're saying about your teenage boys, why someone asked, how can I tell my teenage boys about why it's important to have a regular routine? I think, you say, well, I just was on a webinar at Johns Hopkins and this doctor from Johns Hopkins said it's important. I think that's as likely, by that I mean not very likely, to convince them as anything. And it's also important to let them know you can find a study that supports anything. I'm sharing with you the things that come from 25 years of psychiatric practice and helping people get healthier by having better sleep. Here's an important question. How would you suggest dealing with friends who don't really get it about social distancing? Leave. Throw them out of your house, walk away from them. This is not a time to be messing around. And it's a time that you can say, look, you might not be worried about yourself, but I'm worried about the people that I live with. I'm worried about my older relatives. Get a clue and stop behaving in this way. So we're going to end the call in just a couple of minutes. I want to thank you. This is a new thing for me to be doing a webinar rather than being in a room with many of you. I really appreciate your participation, your excellent questions, and I hope this has been helpful. And we're going to be doing a number of these kind of talks through Women's Journey, because I think having good information and practical information is something that we need to share right now. So again, thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you for listening to A Woman's Journey podcast. Join me, Kelly Gear-Ripken, your host, Lily Shockney, and a variety of Johns Hopkins experts on the first Thursday of each month to learn about medical advances in women's health. A Woman's Journey is grateful for the unrestricted educational grants from BioSense Webster, Boston Scientific, and Keswick Wise and Wellness Center that support our podcast series, Insights That Matter. For more information about A Woman's Journey, visit our website, hopkinsmedicine.org/A Woman's Journey, and like us on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, stay well.